I'm going to call this special meeting to order. This is a joint meeting of the Victorville City Council, City of Victorville, and the Victorville Planning Commission. For the City Council, I hereby call that meeting in order. Chairman of the Planning Commission. Madam Clerk, if we could have a roll call.
Here.
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 Commissioner Huber.
Here.
Commissioner Smith.
Here.
Thank you, City Clerk. Stand please with pledge allegiance to the flag. It's going to be given by Police Chief Sam Lucia. He's the first one on the agenda. He can remain up here at the podium.
Right hand over your heart.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
First item on the agenda is a presentation by our Police Chief Sam Lucia.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, as Sam gets ready, just wanted to kind of preface this with, this is as a result of the City Council's strategic planning session in January. The first topic of importance to the council was Safer City, so that's why it's first up for discussion. I want to caution you against making decisions tonight. That's not really the purpose of tonight's meeting. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to provide you with information on the various topics that cover safer cities, those being, of course, police, also code enforcement, animal control, and then also we're going to talk a little bit about some development standards, commercial development standards that are options that have really never been discussed with the council or the commission, to my knowledge. And so rather than asking you to make some decision on number of animal control, code enforcement, or police officers, we would ask you to reserve that final decision until we can come back in the next few weeks with some budget information. We just wanted to provide you with background so that when we talk about budgets in a few weeks, you can have the background information to make those priority decisions at that point in time. Okay?
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, members of the Planning Commission. Thank you for this opportunity. Mr. Mayor, I know how I've learned by watching Sean McClade how much you like the presentations to be short and concise, so I'll do my best. The topic is a safer community, and tonight you have asked for the police department's perspective when it comes to this. In the past, we've all reviewed statistical studies that, quite frankly, were designed to dazzle more than describe what is truly needed. Although factual, when one finishes digesting the data, it's all very confusing. I don't know if this is a refreshing concept to you or not, but what I want to do is simplify matters, because I know your expectation of me is to tell you in the most simply and plainly words what it is we need. As you would expect, I believe the city needs more deputies. I would be a fool to stand before you today and say that we don't need more. I do not think there is anyone in this room that would disagree with me. However, one thing I do realize is that there is a cost associated, and what it boils down to is whether the money is there or not. I get that. So when I tell you what I think the city needs, I also want to underscore my sensitivity to the fact that it's based on what the economy will allow, taking into account what other city services will be affected. It's not all about us. The last thing I want to do is put the city in an unreasonable position, because I know that when we ask for more police officers, everybody listens. I know firsthand the importance of every city department acknowledge that they contribute to a safer community in some way. Before I get into the meat and potatoes, I want to take just a few minutes and talk about a safer community, but I'd like you all to become more familiar with some aspects of the police department. Number one, beat patterns and reporting districts. Our area of responsibility is 74 square miles. The police department has broken down this space into 75 reporting districts and a maximum of 8 beat patterns. The beat pattern is a fluid number. and is the pattern set at the beginning of each shift based on available staffing. It designates the number of deputies working patrol at any given time. 4 beats equals 4 deputies plus a sergeant. 5 beats equals 5 deputies plus a sergeant, 6, 7, and so on, with a maximum of 8 beats built in this city. Number 2, peak call times, type of calls, and day of week. Peak call time is the time of day when there is a noticeable significant increase in the number of calls for service. This city sees every call type during a 24-hour cycle. However, certain types of call for service routinely increase during certain times. For example, between 11 a.m. and 2 p.m., there is a surge in calls for service that is often related to increased vehicular traffic and increased business or commercial-related incidents. After 2 p.m., there tends to be an increase in more violent calls for service, lasting throughout the night and into the early morning hours, especially in the summertime. The type of calls in the afternoon, evening, and night generally require a multi-unit response. Number 3, proactive patrol time. This is the practice of deterring criminal activity by showing police presence and engaging the public in their concerns, to learn their concerns, thereby preventing crime in the first place. These are the self-initiated calls like pedestrian checks, traffic stops. These are the things we expect our police officers to do when they have the time to do it. If I could direct your attention to the screen. In 2013, thing is working, there it is. In 2013, the deputies handled 102,000 calls for service. As you can see, this slide shows how the calls of service have increased since 2010. The deputies completed 14,786 crime reports in the year 2013. In this city, the concept of proactive patrol is virtually unrealized because on a regular basis, not only are deputies responding from call to call, but there are calls holding. At times in a 24-hour period, there is some proactive patrol, but that mostly occurs in the early morning hours or by some of the specialized deputies. There are things that have a positive effect on our ability to conduct proactive patrol. The obvious is boots on the ground. Other things include the reduction in the number of problem establishments that we have in the city. What I mean by that is bars, nightclubs, liquor stores, pawn shops, and social services located within the city, such as parole, probation. If you don't know this already, Victorville is where probation and parole are located, nowhere else in the high desert. And a lot of our registrants and a lot of those that have to do regular reporting must stay within a certain radius of that office. That means Victorville. If we spend less time at problem establishments, we spend more time elsewhere in the city. Number 4, AB 109, state prison realignment. The Public Policy Institute of California in December 2013 published a study on the effects of realignment. Their analysis of violent crime found no evidence that realignment had an effect on most serious crimes such as murder and rape. The evidence on robbery was uncertain. However, they did find robust evidence that realignment is related to property crime. As we all know, property crimes are quality of life issues.
I'm sorry, would you repeat what property crimes are?
Quality of life issues. The analysis further states that more crime would be prevented by spending additional dollars on policing rather than incarceration. California has experienced a prolonged period of decline in crime rates, but it has started to increase and will eventually increase someday. Number 5, relief factors. When considering the number of staff for a 24-hour operation, there are several aspects that must be considered when determining adequate and effective staffing levels. Those things include family medical leave, military leave, mandatory training, vacation leave, temporary duty assignments, long-term disability, modified duty, advanced officer training, and of course the training of new deputies. At any given time, we have approximately 4 to 7 trainees being trained at any given time. Their training program is approximately 6 months. So for 6 months, we lose the ability of having that trained deputy out there working in a car of his own. He's partnered up with an experienced deputy going through the field training program. Getting back to the screen, what you see in front of you is the designed deployment model. Victorville has a total of 66 deputy positions. That does not include detectives, sergeants, command staff, or professional staff. You'll notice that we have 42 deputies assigned to patrol functions, and that's broken down between 5 shifts. We have the AM shift, which runs from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. We have 15 personnel assigned to that shift. We have an AM cover shift. Back up a little bit, remember the surge in calls throughout the day. We have a need for a cover shift that runs from 11 a.m. to 9 p.m. We have 4 deputies assigned to that. Another 15 assigned to our PM shift from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. And again, a cover shift of 4 deputies to come in at 3 p.m. and cover till 1 a.m. Or in the summertime, we adjust those hours and they come in at 5 p.m. and work till 3 a.m. because we're experiencing a lot of late night and early morning calls in the summertime. The 24 specialized deputies are our retail, our SRO, our DUI, our motors, our APS and CPS follow-up deputies. The APS and CPS follow-up deputies, what they do is they investigate the inordinate amount of CPS and APS referrals that we receive on a daily basis. The law requires that we address those referrals within a certain time frame, and we literally receive hundreds of those a week. So those 2 deputies do nothing but handle that. Then we have 9 people assigned to our Met Gang detail. Met Gang includes our alcohol compliance team. It includes our crime-free multi-housing deputies. It includes our special projects deputies along with Met and Gang. And these are the deputies that spend most of their time doing proactive patrol in the city because, quite frankly, we do have a gang problem. And we felt that it was necessary to continue keeping that unit beefed up because of the needs that we have in the city. Next slide. When you consider the above relief factors combined with others such as sick time, the total number of patrol positions is significantly impacted. This is what our typical deployment model looks like when you factor in all of the relief factors. You'll see that patrol drops to 18 people, and that's because on the AM shift, at any given time, during any given week, during any given schedule, we'll have 2 trainees, 2 people on vacation, 3 people at advanced officer training, 1 on FMLA, and 1 on a temporary duty assignment. And this just kind of depicts what the typical deployment is in reality. Same with the other shifts. The vacancy you see there under the specialized section has actually been filled as of today. Deputy Billy Hogan, I'm sure you're all familiar with him doing the alcohol compliance things. He got promoted to detective, and his last day was last Friday. We will receive a new deputy sheriff for his position on May 3rd. We feel it's prudent to always have at least 6 beat pattern, and considering our typical deployment model, it's impossible to achieve that without overtime. You, the council, have graciously budgeted $517,000 annually for overtime, which is primarily exhausted maintaining a full 6 beat pattern. This does not take into account critical incidents, high-profile cases, disaster response, or incidents of civil unrest, as with the Trayvon Martin March last November, which severely impacted the overtime budget. This year, we will exhaust the budget trying best to keep the 6 beats filled. This is in addition to the roughly $200,000 in grant funds used this year for overtime projects such as summertime crime suppression and our Safe Holiday Shopping campaign, which, by the way, both were very successful. The deputies do a fantastic job for you, day in and day out, policing the city, but we're playing catch-up. We know where our future calls for service are headed. A full 6-beat pattern, 24 hours a day, plus peak time coverage is certainly the least we should strive for, but it's not ideal. We must think about future planning as well. Next slide. As we think about the future, the goal deployment model should be for this council to consider a full 8-beat pattern, 24 hours a day, plus peak time coverage. That gives us 8 deputies plus a supervisor in the field at all times, plus peak time coverage, both on the AM shift and on the PM shift. It will increase proactive patrol time, decrease response times, and contribute to a safer community. As previously mentioned, this takes money. In order to mitigate the financial impact, a consideration may be a multi-year phased approach that would evenly distribute the associated personnel costs each subsequent fiscal year, while providing incremental increases to overall staffing. Of course, that is based on economic factors and budgetary constraints or concerns. In closing, I think it's important to boast that during this last year, the police department has built strong relationships with many city departments, and together we're becoming more effective in the community. It's also my feeling that growth in the police department should not come at the expense of other city departments. You have asked me what I feel is needed. Having said that, and as a resident of the city, I anticipate there will be more discussion. Time is greatly appreciated. Thank you. Any questions?
Sam, first of all, thank you very much for the presentation. Secondly, I know that staff will be looking at this, talking with you in regard to what we can do budget-wise. There will be more questions, and I'm sure during the budget we will get into a lot of those. I have a question that kind of stood out. Because of the county courthouse, the system, the parolees, the reporting requirement, are there additional funds to this city by the state or the county that's not to other cities as a result of having the courthouse here and the reporting by those who are under some kind of court constraints?
None that I am aware of.
None that you're aware of.
We do receive some realignment money, but that goes to all of the cities, and that's supposed to go into the proactive enforcement and contacts of our REB 109 inmates.
Questions by the council members?
Sam, you indicated, could you go back to that slide where it indicated what you were looking for was 80? Possible?
Is that the slide you're speaking of?
Yes, yeah, that's a slide.
That shows an increase of 14 deputies to the patrol side of the house, bringing 42 up to 56.
Okay, but when you showed us the earlier slide, it said we currently have 66, but in reality, when you take into account all these other things, we only have 41 on at any one time. What would that 80 realize at any one time?
That would ensure an 8-beat pattern system, full 24 hours a day, plus our covered shifts.
Sam, question. Your first slide indicated 89,000 calls for service. I think it was in 2010. Yeah. Next one. In 2013, went to 102. I'm sorry, 108,000.
Yeah, this thing's
It's
a little
coming.
slow.
It takes a little bit of time.
I'm going to close it, reopen it.
I would not have thought our population has changed that much in this 3-year period. What do you think accounts for that? What is that, a 20-25% increase in calls for service?
I think realignment has a great deal to do with it.
The other thing was you've got 108 or 102,000, I've lost the number now, calls for service, but only 14,000 crime reports.
Correct.
What does that mean? We're getting a lot of calls for things that aren't crimes?
Correct. A lot of calls for things that don't require a criminal investigation or a police report.
Such as?
There's the screen. You go to a husband and wife dispute that's nothing but verbal. Still a serious call, but it doesn't require a deputy report. It requires a response, however. Go to a crash where the parties are exchanging the information at roadside. Doesn't require a report. There's your numbers in front of you.
That leads to another question. You obviously know when you get the calls what you're responding to and why. Is there any particular category that requires more calls than average for this size city? And is there something that this city council can do to eliminate that particular category of calls?
Well, as mentioned, there are a lot of problem establishments that eat up a lot of our time. The bars, the nightclubs, the liquor stores, the pawn shops, those are all places that attract a criminal element. Those are all places that we spend an inordinate amount of time at when we could be elsewhere servicing the city. That's one approach.
Yeah, Mayor, that I don't mean to cut off the council or the commission from this item, but that's actually the subject of our next item on the agenda, which is commercial codes. And there are some options there that we'd like some discussion on when the time is appropriate that I don't know that has really been presented to the council, maybe to the commission, with regard to Sam had mentioned the proactive patrol time. When we met as a senior staff as a follow-up to the January meeting, my first question to Sam was, what if we were to try to come up with one data point that has the greatest effect on crime or crime stats, what would that be? And his first response was proactive patrol time. More proactive patrol time, the more crime you can prevent from happening. So there's ways to do that. Obviously, if you hire additional deputies, you end up with more proactive patrol time. But these calls for service, and Councilmember Kennedy called out that you have 102,000 calls for service and 14,000 reports. You still have to respond 102,000 times, which takes time, which takes a deputy, which takes money from the city to pay that deputy. If you consider changing or not allowing as many of these establishments that have a higher attraction of criminal element, you can reduce those calls for service, which has the same effect as adding deputies. Now, certainly the percentage isn't there, and we don't even know what it might be, but that's something that we want to talk about in the next agenda item.
And that really is an investment in the future, going toward reducing calls for service.
Sam, if we're talking about 14 deputies at what, $125,000 per?
We're expensive.
Yeah, but I mean that's about $1.75 million. I just took me a while on my phone here, but I did the
More
calculation.
accurate figure is roughly 180
180 per
when you build everything into it.
vehicles, and it's
Yes.
vacation and whatever.
Retirement.
Dispatch service,
Dispatch,
benefits,
yeah.
retirements, all of
Supervision.
those things. that come
So to
along
get
with
those 14 was going to take probably $2.5 million.
it. And I would expect the council to look at that as future growth,
Okay.
not
Councilman
tomorrow.
Catherine?
Well, that was my question. What was the cost per deputy? And I assume that as we get into the budgeting process, that phased-in approach that you're talking about, you'll provide some thoughts there to
Yes, sir.
staff, because I know for one, I'd like to see us. Maybe it's not the full 14, maybe it is, but how could we phase that in over a period of several years, and how can staff budget appropriately for that?
Other questions from council members? We have a joint meeting of the Planning Commission and Council. Do you have any questions from the Planning Commission?
I have just one question. I was curious on our goal of 80 deputies. Is that in line with what is being staffed in other cities that might be the same land area and population as Victorville?
I don't have that answer for you today. That is in line with where I see the needs of the city being.
I have a question. Would it be accurate to state that, it would be difficult to look at other cities unless they have the same disposable income that we have or we don't have, and the same type of condensed housing? That would all make a difference, correct?
Sure it would.
Then just comparing, us to Orange County or comparing us to Apple Valley, you'd have to compare us with the same economic and geographic type of background, right?
Population,
All of that matters.
all of that, yes. Quite an endeavor.
Okay. Doug, number 2, commercial land use restrictions.
Sure. Number 2, Sam, I don't know if you have anything to add. You kind of mentioned some of these issues with the commercial land use. You mentioned the nightclubs, pawn shops, bars, massage parlors, those sorts of things. And we actually have this scheduled, although we haven't published the agenda yet. We have this scheduled for discussion again next week as we talk about housing specifically, because those types of businesses, especially to the extent that they're, as you enter the city, can have an effect on the desirability of your city. So we want to bridge this discussion on commercial development over these 2 meetings. But Sam, did you have anything additional to add on those types of businesses related specifically
Other
to crime?
than, let's face it, when we think of a pawn shop, whether the intentions of the business owner are pure or not, those are fencing locations for stolen property, plain and simple. And that's the element that uses and goes to those. I've been in them before, and that's what it looks like to me. And that's where our detectives find a lot of the stolen property that's reported in burglaries throughout the city. Massage parlors. I was just talking to Chris Borchert, who's been looking into those lately, and you walk into them and they're dark and you can't see, and we know that those have been in the past homes for prostitution. When I was in the narcotics division, we actually did stings in the city where we showed that they were engaged in solicitation of prostitution. The social service offices we talked about, the bars, the nightclubs, I don't want to name any businesses in particular, but we're right back where we were a few months ago with one particular problem establishment in the city and how it's affecting the other businesses in the local area.
All right. Thanks, Sam.
Welcome.
So as we move forward, Brandon, if you could put the map up there. We wanted to broach this topic. Certainly the current city council, actually let me back up. In the past, in the city's past, the overarching thoughts on development of the city was heavily weighted to the side of private property owners' rights. If you owned a piece of property and you wanted to develop it, past city councils had the opinion that you should be able to develop it however you so choose, which is admirable. It's resulted in an oversaturation of certain types of businesses, an oversaturation of certain types of residential housing that we'll talk about next week. So staff isn't here with any recommendations at this point. We're not here even advocating for any changes to any policies you currently have. As we talked about this last month as senior staff trying to decide how we were going to approach a safer city, one issue came up that I wanted to provide the council a little bit more information on. Every alcohol-related business that comes before you for development, be it a liquor store, be it a grocery store with liquor, be it whatever, a bar, the location of that property is important. Before you is a map. The green areas and the numbers on the map are a census tract. I'm going to attempt to give you this in lay terms, and we actually have a guest with us tonight who can explain it much better than I can. So each of these is a census tract, and this is essentially a heat map. And the way these alcohol license locations work is that if the census tract is below the average number in the county, then they can simply open up. They don't need any additional approval, just like any other business they could open up. However, if an alcohol license is applied for in an area that is over the county average, over concentrated, those would be in red, Orange is very close, but it's not quite over. But all of the red areas means that there are more alcohol licenses within that census tract than the county average. The commission and the council have the option of denying that, finding that we have enough. We have enough liquor stores. We have enough bars, whatever it is. We have enough alcohol available within that census tract. And you could say no. Again, not suggesting it. Obviously, there's some commercial corridors that maybe it's better to have an overconcentration there rather than having another one pop up in a neighborhood, let's say. But it was simply an option that we wanted to have some discussion from the commission and the council on if it's something that you'd like the staff to take a look at, maybe some other policies and things like that. With that, that was my attempt at explaining it, but I want to invite up Armando Gonzalez. He's the supervising agent in charge for the Department of Alcohol Beverage Control for the state of California. He actually runs San Bernardino and Riverside counties. And go ahead, Armando.
Before we go much further, can you explain exactly what this is? This the city of
This
Victorville?
is the city of Victorville. The diagonal line, essentially, well, there's two diagonal lines. The hard diagonal line that goes in between the two gray areas, those are county pockets. That's actually a utility corridor. Let's see here, I-15. If you look all the way to the very bottom of your map, the right section is I-15, and you can see that line essentially goes diagonally, thank you, Brandon, up through the city. You just pass the mall, then you're coming to Palmdale Road, and there's the golf course on the right. And I-15 continues on and then exits to the north there. So the larger string of dots that kind of spread out from that area is 7th Street. 7th Street and Palmdale Road. Obviously, you have a concentration along Palmdale Road, and you have a concentration along 7th Street, and clearly Bear Valley to the furthest south, furthest down, also has more of these locations. So anyway, that gives you some orientation. Thank you.
If staff would just kind of take this down, well, I don't want you to do it just for me if the council isn't interested, but if they are interested, I'll tell you what I would like to see. These are establishments that sell alcoholic beverages. But are they grocery stores that sell, convenience stores that sell, liquor stores? Just what are they?
Yeah, it's all of the above. It's bars, it is grocery stores, and it is convenience stores.
Well,
Anybody that has an alcohol license. So some of the policies that could be available should the council wish us to research them would be separating those out by, is the alcohol license the primary business, or is it an ancillary use to, say, a convenience store? Costco is one of the dots on here.
Well, that's one of the things I was
alcohol.
thinking about with the business license being the way they are, that someone could actually tell us what they are.
Yes,
It wouldn't be too
yes,
difficult.
we can certainly do that research pretty easily. So.
Okay, we have a gentleman here that's going to speak to us, so go right ahead.
Good evening. Excuse me. Good evening, council members. Again, my name is Armando Gonzalez. I'm a supervising agent in charge with the California Department of Alcoholic Beverage Control. I have been asked to speak to and answer any questions that you have regarding a term called public convenience or necessity. As you may or may not be aware, Section 23958.4 of the California Business and Professions Code speaks to undue concentration and the term public convenience or necessity. At this current time, through I believe a 1995 resolution, your planning commission makes a determination of public convenience or necessity. Before we get into that section, I kind of want to point out some definitions so we're all on the same page. On-sale locations are basically businesses that you consume on site. Okay, so these are going to be your bars, your restaurants, your nightclubs. Okay, and your off-sale locations, basically just that term. You're consuming away from the location. We're going to speak about a term called general licenses. General licenses are basically your liquor stores or your restaurants or bars that serve distilled spirits. Okay, so general licenses will include beer, wine, and distilled spirits. And then we'll talk about your normal beer and wine licenses. Just that, beer and wine, no distilled spirits. As you can see on that map there, every community is divided into census tracts. And within that census tract, there is a limited number of licenses that are authorized within that census tract, and that's based on population. So Section 23817, again, of the Business and Professions Code, basically allows one license for every 2,500 residents within that census tract. And Section 23816 basically speaks to on-sale locations, and that's broken down to one license for every 2,000 residents. Okay. Given the above, I'm sure you're going to say, hey, that basically let's take that census tract 100.09, which is basically assuming Bear Valley and Amargosa. That census tract for on-sale locations, and I believe this map that you see up here only speaks to off-sale establishments. From what I'm noting on the blue dots there, it looks like it's only off-sale establishments. So your liquor stores, your grocery stores, Costco, things of that nature. So going back to Bear Valley and Amargosa, there's only 2 licenses allowed due to population. However, there's 14 licenses in existence within that census tract. Okay, but that's going to include your Applebee's, your Mimi's Cafe, and so forth. In order to explain why there's an excess of licenses in that census tract, let's go back to that section 23958.4. Basically, that allows our department to make basically exemptions where there's a finding of public convenience or necessity. As our department is the sole agency that's responsible to issue alcohol licenses, local government has a huge voice in this because this section here allows local government to basically say, no, we've had enough. And undue concentration only applies to original licenses, so new licenses within that census tract. Okay, it doesn't apply to any license that's already in existence. Okay, and it also applies to licenses that are moving within census tracts. In order to define undue concentration, you need 2 findings. Either there's a high crime area, basically 20% of the area average. Okay, if it's over 20%, that's considered high crime, or there's an over concentration of licenses in that area. So again, I'm going to speak to Bear Valley and Amargosa. Local government has that opportunity to basically make a determination of public convenience or necessity for your off-sale establishments. So again, your liquor stores, your grocery stores, and your convenience markets. Basically, if we take one census tract and basically say, hey, only 3 are allowed within that census tract, however, 5 are in existence, what happens through our application process is the applicant goes to local government and must obtain public convenience or necessity. And again, as it currently stands, your planning commission makes that determination. Our department does not proceed with the issuance of that license until local government makes that determination. Okay, so what I'm saying is local government has their voice. If these blue dots are of concern to you, you do have 23958.4 to basically say, again, enough's enough. In regards to public convenience or necessity, the local governing body has 90 days to make a determination. And the 90 days starts basically when you're notified. Our department, once we receive an application, we notify 3 individuals. We notify the city attorney or district attorney, city council, board of supervisors, and the local police department. At that point, you have 90 days to make a determination. If currently you have a public convenience or necessity application process, if let's say they apply with us in January, but they don't apply for the determination of public convenience or necessity until February, The later date is the start date. So in this case, it would be February. Okay. Should you, the local governing body, not make a determination of public convenience or necessity within 90 days, at that point, the determination falls on the applicant. So again, it's crucial that our department, as well as local government, share the responsibility to make sure that communities are safe. And if you refuse to use that section, it could be harmful to your community. If city government does not make that determination or refuses to make that determination, the department attributes no weight to that. We just go ahead and make our own determination at that point. We don't go back to the drawing table and say, governing body refused, so at that point we're going to refuse or deny the application. That's not how it works. We'll make that finding in that investigation. Keep in mind, when making a determination of public convenience or necessity, on-sale establishments and off-sale establishments are completely separate. You can't use your off-sale stats or statistics to basically deny a public convenience or necessity for a on-sale establishment. Completely two separate statistics. One thing I'd like to note that this section does not apply to locations that have been open and operating within 90 days. So let's say there was a grocery store that was that canceled their license or just simply went out of business. If we received a new application within a 90-day period, PCN or public convenience or necessity does not apply. I can go on and speak to public or convenience or necessity. I just kind of want to give you guys a brief description of what that is and how you basically have a tool to use should you choose to use it if areas become over-concentrated. So at this point, is there any questions from the council?
Questions for council members?
Well, my understanding is that if the area is over-concentrated, you will not be allowing a license, whether it's on-site or off-site, correct?
That is incorrect.
It is incorrect?
Incorrect. If it's an on-sale establishment, the applicant makes that determination. Again, on-sale establishment, and we're talking about only bona fide eating places, so your restaurant licenses. They make that determination of public convenience or necessity to us. Okay. In regards to off-sale establishments, so your liquor stores, your grocery stores, your convenience stores, as well as any bars or taverns, if the area that they're applying for is over-concentrated, at that point, the local government body must make a determination of public convenience or necessity. So if you do, and our investigation proves that there will be no issues with this application, we can proceed with issuance of that license. And that's how we come with those numbers where, again, Bear Valley and Amargosa, 2 licenses allowed, however, we have 14.
Correct, because I happen to know of 2 different restaurants that were denied. They appealed, and eventually they did get their license. And it was only 41 license.
Denied through our department?
Pardon?
Was that denied through our department?
My understanding, yes.
Again, a Type 41 license would not require public convenience or necessity from the local governing body because it is a bona fide restaurant. At that point, the applicant makes that determination.
Yeah, and to follow up on that, so this is only related to stores that you can go in and buy alcohol and take it off-site to consume. And like I said, to start this, staff doesn't really have a recommendation at this point. Just wanted to bring it to the council's attention, and I know the commission regularly sees these. I don't know if the commission has ever denied it or said that they didn't make that finding based on the history of the city. Typically isn't something that was done. I think it's, my understanding is that it's sort of part of the package that gets approved, and there hasn't been a tremendous amount of discussion about the option of saying no. And don't know if we would recommend that you say no, but it's something for the council and commission to discuss and potentially give direction to staff on if it's something you'd like more research on. That's the only reason it's on tonight.
Okay,
Mr.
so
Kennedy, I'm sorry, go ahead. Ms. Vice?
on the agenda it says this is for the purpose of discussion and possible directions of the items listed below.
Correct.
So you are asking us if we want to do this, to limit
There,
liquor stores.
not necessarily, no. On this, we aren't even making a recommendation to limit it, because I think there's more research involved if that's the desire of the council, because how you limit it is important. As I mentioned, maybe it makes sense because the dots that are in sequence there are in a commercial corridor. And maybe it makes better sense to have those types of establishments in that commercial corridor rather than if you were to deny them in the census tracts in the commercial areas of the city, they could then push further out into someone's neighborhood and open a liquor store without having to get that certificate of public convenience and necessity. So it was more just to introduce the idea to the council and commission and see if you'd like some further study on this, or if you have any recommendations, or if you have opinions on it, definitely. But we don't have anything we're not recommending anything tonight that we would be asking the council or the commission to say, yes, pursue this, because we don't know what we would be pursuing.
Okay, so whenever you want my opinion, let me know.
We'd love to have your opinion, just not. I'm not asking you to say yes or no, because there isn't a yes or no question. But
Okay.
we'd love to have your opinion right now.
Right now? Okay,
Right now.
here it goes. Well, I would definitely think that we need to separate out the dots and make sure that, what are we separating out? Is it Mimi's, Applebee's, Costco, grocery stores? I mean, obviously, those, to me are acceptable. But what concerns me is that we're having too many liquor stores, whether or not they're in. I don't like the liquor store in Brentwood. That really bothers me. Every time I drive by there, I'm so disturbed at what I see in the loitering in the parking lot and the criminal element that's just hanging out there. It's just disturbing. And to know that we have families that are just right there in that neighborhood, and children walking home from school and bus stops there, it really bothers me. I don't want to see that in our. If we could limit the amount of liquor stores that we have in the city of Victorville, I would definitely be for that. Limiting the pawn shops, the bars, strip club. I don't even know. Do we even have a strip club? Do we have a strip club?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
None that we know of.
Yeah, not allowing strip clubs. I don't know what we can do about probation since they're already here. But when we have our police chief come to us and tell us that, we need 14 more deputies, and each deputy is costing $180,000, we have to figure out a way to slow or avoid big government. And if we can do that by having better building codes and restricting these types of establishments that create large amounts of calls to code enforcement and law enforcement, I think that we have that responsibility to do that, because these pensions and these positions are very, very costly. Obviously, if we have, like you stated, bona fide restaurants and establishments that are responsible. I'm referring to the seedy type bars, the internet cafes, these nightclubs that are causing all these problems, and massage parlors that are creepy. Things like that. We need to, I think as a council, we need to step up and we need to do the right thing for our community and to create a better quality of life. So if that helps you in any way.
It does.
Okay.
It definitely does. So Armando's here just really solely on the off-sale issue. Obviously, his department would cover the on-sale, meaning the bars and restaurants. One of the things that staff has seen in other cities is that one of the decision points for other cities would be, is it the primary use or an accessory use? So if just as an example, if a request came in an over-concentrated area, if it were an accessory use, meaning a Costco or a grocery store who happens to also sell alcohol, Some other cities have policies that say that they would allow that type of use for alcohol sales, but not, once it's hit over concentration, not additional stores that's primary sale was the alcohol.
Couple of questions, just to make sure I have this right. The off-sale license requires a finding of public necessity and convenience, or public convenience and necessity?
If in an area that it's already over-concentrated.
Only if it's only if it's over-concentrated.
Exactly.
I'm looking at this map, and I'm looking at 7th Street, and I'm wondering how anybody could make an argument that the public, for their convenience and necessity, needs another liquor store along 7th Street. Paul, has the Planning Commission addressed this? I mean, do you get it presented to you this way?
Yeah.
The other question, and then I'll drop it, is well, not drop it. I'm just let somebody else dominate. After the ABC licenses an establishment, do you have any ongoing monitoring or enforcement responsibility, or is that strictly something that local law enforcement has to deal with?
No, definitely. We do monitor it. I have a limited staff to cover San Bernardino and Riverside counties, so we are complaint driven. Anytime that we do receive a complaint on an on sale or any type of alcohol establishment, yeah, our department will go ahead and respond to that complaint.
So if we have an existing store where we've got people hanging around in the parking lot drinking from buying and then going out and drinking and throwing their trash on the street, we can make this in the form of a complaint to ABC?
Most definitely.
In fact, to expand on that, our two deputies who routinely go out and do these inspections for us actually work very closely with Armando and his staff. We're essentially enforcing what they may not have the time to enforce, and then they come and help us out as necessary. So as we discover these problems, we turn it over to him as well.
This is outside the realm of our ordinance, but we can do some enforcement against those offending stores that
Absolutely.
are giving us a lot of grief.
And we do. And we do.
I would agree with Chairman Porter. I don't recall in all the years I was on the Planning Commission ever seeing it presented like this. It was more likely in black and white with some gray scale, and it would only be in that particular area, so you didn't see the whole city, and that's my recollection. I'm also recalling that based upon council directive and our policies, priorities at the time, there was never any sort of recommendation from staff as to whether or not this was an appropriate use in that location with respect to just the sale of alcohol. Is that correct? I'm looking at staff right now because I know Chris is not here.
That is correct. And it's not meant to, the map and all this discussion isn't meant to be critical of past councils or past policies.
But I think
it was
my
all
point,
private property owners' rights.
My point is that in order for staff and or the commission to head down that road, it would require the council to have that kind of directive, that kind of policy established so that they know that when they're looking at these particular establishments coming into the city, they've got to look at it with a much heavier eye of scrutiny, because that's not something we want to see a proliferation of anymore. Obviously, you know, we want to be business friendly and all that, but at the same time, if you know you've got 5 convenience stores on any one corner, do we really need that? And I think that that's where we're at this point in time. We need to start actually saying, yeah, enough is enough.
Yeah, and that's kind of the point, is just as the current city council has transitioned away from a complaint-driven code enforcement to more of a proactive code enforcement, does the council and commission want the staff to look at this in a more proactive manner rather than as complaint?
Yes.
Before we answer, let me turn this over to Chairperson Porter for comments from the Planning Commission or the members.
Yeah, I've, you know, regarding the Planning Commission, you know, going back 10 years on this, we've, you know, approved many that had a over-concentration. And, you know, you had made mention that if the city didn't make that approval, it could be harmful. What's your take on seeing this map with the concentration that you see here in Victorville? What do you see being harmful in the red? Other than other cities with this similar concentration.
This is, it may be harmful if law enforcement is showing signs that these locations are taken away from their calls for service. Is this do I see these types of maps in other cities? Most definitely. We look at, let's say, the city of San Diego. Obviously, we're not apples and oranges here, but you'll see a much greater concentration of licenses.
And I think this goes to, just looking at this map on the surface, looks like, wow, there's a whole bunch of blue dots right there. That's a problem. Well, maybe not necessarily. As a planning commissioner, I'd look at it and say, is that an undue concentration? Well, also, you can see it's almost across. Those are major arterials, and if we turn this into a zoning map, the red color that would be commercial zoning would just be that little strip, mostly where you see those blue dots. So that's really all that they can go. And I'm looking at Bear Valley Road, and I'm seeing 2 gas stations. I'm seeing Vaughn's. I'm seeing a liquor store. I see another gas station. And they all have, off-site sales. So I'm not sure, like when I'm a planning commissioner, I look at it, I don't know if it's undue concentration. Should I not allow one more in Census Tract 99.13 because that'll stop crime? Or if we eliminated most of them, would everybody just go to those 2 liquor stores and they'd just be long lines? Would it make a whole big difference? That's the question I always ask myself, and I'm not sure when it comes to the concentration in these pockets.
Button.
Green light.
Okay, I'm colorblind.
Again, Paul?
I was trying to tell the police.
I said that we should establish some criteria to, so that we can establish a primary versus accessory uses. So because that would make a big difference right there. I think the liquor store is one thing. I think that Costco is another thing. Mm-hmm. They probably wouldn't even come into the city without a liquor license. But that's not, Costco isn't the person that's causing the problem. That's not the kind of business that's causing any kind of a problem. And when I see it's all Bear Valley and 7th Street, and those are our main arteries for commercial. I agree with Rob Kurth that, but I think if we could have a criteria for primary versus accessory, we could make a better decision.
I agree, because with the Planning Commission, if we're looking at it and it's off sale, maybe we should take into effect more that, okay, this is a grocery store with a very minimal part of their business for off sale, and this one is a strip center liquor store, which already has a strip center, 2 of them on the same corner, or something like that. Maybe we could be more aware in that case.
And I would also say that the most of them that have come before us have been accessory uses.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of these are. And that, I think we've got the direction we were looking for. It was more of an introduction, and would you like staff to take another look at this to bring something back? Red and even the line of blue dots, or even the concentration of blue dots you see in a couple of areas, doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. I think staff, at least I, share some of Commissioner Kurth's concern about, okay, if you were to simply say no, have you done anything other than prevented a business from opening, because are they going to go next door and buy the alcohol there? We don't really know those answers, but it's something that really hasn't been at the forefront of the council's mind or the commission's mind. It's been part of a package that simply was approved because that's what was asked, and it's not meant to be critical. It's not meant to say that these are bad neighborhoods or good neighborhoods as a result. In fact, the liquor store, if I have my bearings correct here, the liquor store that Councilmember Valles talked about is in an area that is not over concentrated. So even if you wanted to say no to a neighborhood liquor store, you couldn't.
However, we do have a tool that we can eliminate that problem, even with the ABC. I mean, with the ABC.
Well, I think we have information that has not been presented previously to the Planning Commission and the Council. There is, as you can see, Armando, thank you for your presentation. There's a lot of interest in this. I'd like to see what these stores are. Also, I know, knowing Doug, he's going to be sitting down with our police chief to find out if there are problem areas. I know that one store that has been referenced is a store that I have been there twice because they have the sale of the little bottles that get thrown outside, and then the people hang around and say things that they shouldn't be saying to people walking on the sidewalk. It may be a time where we're going to ask people to voluntarily comply with our restrictions on, what do we call these? Single serve. Single serve. Because I didn't know we could file complaints, but we have 2 or 3 stores in town that are just known for those kind of problems, and I know the police department is there because I've seen them roll. And if it may be related to single serve, and it just may be something that we address through a complaint with the ABC, if they want to stay in good standing with the city, with the neighborhood, and with the ABC, they may want to voluntarily comply with our prohibition on single serve. But we do have other issues here, and a lot of information. Appreciate it. I know we're all going to discuss it. Doug, I think you have the message from the council. We have one more comment from Councilmember Valles.
I just want to see if the council was interested in receiving a report from, I guess it's code enforcement or the police department, of how many liquor stores that they are monitoring and making the complaints to ABC. I really want these other liquor stores that are grandfathered in to be held accountable.
Actually, we're lucky to have Deputy Brian Waterhouse here. Brian, if you could come down and just talk about, he's the remaining deputy who doesn't have a partner until, what was it, Monday, May 3rd or so, or 5th. He's the one that lost Billy. But if you could explain how that program works, your cooperation with ABC and reviewing those licenses, the single serve, and some of the avenues that you're pursuing with regard to underage drinking, that we can apply some pressure to some of these businesses to gain compliance.
I'm Deputy Waterhouse. Real quick, a lot of this program had to do with our current captain. He's the one that brought the alcohol compliance team into existence, and it's I've been doing this 24 years, and it's important. Basically, once we started this program, we went down to ABC. I personally met with Armando and some of the other agents that work this area. Some of the things that we do, we go out and do decoy programs, underage sales. We also do shoulder tap programs, and we do that with ABC. They're on board with us. We have brought to you before the single serve issue, and we really believe that that's going to be an issue that helps out in the future. As the captain said earlier, it's an investment in the future. It really is. And when I say that, I mean calls for service, panhandling, drunk in public, open containers. These are when you looked at the calls for service that he talked about, and then how that relates to actual reports that are taken, these are the kind of calls that we're talking about, where we go out because somebody's panhandling, and we go up, we investigate it, we're out looking for them in the area because they might not be there. It's still a call that has to be handled. But when we do these other programs, the decoy programs, the shoulder tap programs, we're working with ABC. These reports, if they do sell to us or to one of our decoys, this report, there's 2 aspects to it. One of it is a criminal case that goes to the DA where that person is prosecuted for selling to a minor. The other is an administrative, and it goes to ABC where they fine them, or they can put other restrictions on their license. That's one of the things that we look at, bringing the ones that violate also back to the Planning Commission to get the single serve ordinance imposed on their license. So these are all things that we are actively doing on a regular basis.
Thank you,
Can we get a report?
Any questions of Deputy Waterhouse? Questions? Thank you very much.
Right, you're welcome.
Yeah, we're actually going to have, as I said, this is going to be on the agenda for next week as well, because it affects both the Safer City, but also the attractiveness of our city. So we'll have more information, not just on alcohol-related businesses, but those other businesses as well, and their impacts as to the attractiveness of our city. These are big changes versus what's happened in the past. Some may say that we're trying to regulate social behavior. That's not the intent. The intent is that we need more cops than we can afford right now, and if we can reduce the number of cops that we need, it has the same effect as hiring more. So there are ways to do it. The data isn't necessarily always a one-to-one ratio. It's a matter of trying to grow in a better way in the future so that we need less law enforcement and ultimately have a safer city.
Other questions in regard to this item? Can we move on to item number 3, animal control?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to ask Christian Gunchert, our Director of Community Services, to come down. He inherited animal control not long ago as I made a few changes. And his purpose tonight really is to share with the council where we are with the number of officers. We get a lot of complaints about animal control. And where, just as Captain Lucia talked about, where the department, we'd like it to be in the future to the extent that funding is available to fund this priority. Christian?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Council, Commissioners. I'd like to share with you a few things to start with in terms of general statistics. Animal control is an area that is here in Victorville, its primary purpose has been rabies control for lots and lots of years. As the population has grown, as the demographics have changed, the officers have been called upon to do more and more things associated with not only dealing with the animals, which are the easy part, but also the people. A few statistics. Animal control typically receives about 7,500 calls for service per year. That works out to about 20 calls per day. That's 365 days a year. When they get in on Monday morning, they have to clear up the things that couldn't be handled or had to be triaged out for the weekend that didn't get taken care of. In addition, they handle about 4,000 animals a year that they pick up. That's about 12 per day, 365 days per year. And of those animals, only about 1 to 2 are actually returned to their owners. They're actually claimed. That's not a very high percentage. One of the things we've tried to focus on has been microchipping and subsidized microchipping through grants and grant applications that we've made over the last few years, as well as subsidized spay and neuter clinics through grants. Another thing is Victorville's animal control officers are open for business approximately the same amount of time as surrounding communities here in the area, somewhere between 40 and 49 hours per week, with a few days off here and there. Victorville itself currently is open Monday through Thursday 7 to 5, and Friday 7 to 4. Adelanto Monday through Thursday 7 to 6. Apple Valley, Tuesday through Saturday, 9 to 4. Hesperia, Monday through Thursday, 8 to 5, and Friday, 8 to 4 also. We're actually kind of on the high end in terms of the amount of hours that we're actually open and have officers in the field. We all get those calls in the middle of the night that have barking dogs. One of the major things that we've done this year so far is we've been reworking our codes, the municipal code, and updating it to give us a few more teeth, so to speak, give us an opportunity to handle more calls and more issues faster. And those code revisions are actually into Doug at this point, and we hope to have those before too long, so you actually have a chance to do some things. One item of note in those codes is that's going to be thrown out there is the mandatory spay-neuter for a pit bull and pit bull mix animals outside of AKC registered show dogs. So that's one of the things that seems to be a major problem here in Victorville. Seems probably more associated with demographics than anything else. We hope to, to give you an idea, Those 4 officers that we only have 4 animal control officers. They handle, Victorville has a population of approximately 113,000 people in our last census. Those work out to, I believe it's around 24,000 people per officer that they have to deal with in terms of their calls. Sorry, 28,250 residents of Victorville per officer. And just for comparison, Barstow has approximately 23,000 people in its 2010 census. So each officer has a lot of calls and a lot of people that they have to handle. What we'd like to do, and will be hopefully at some point possibly getting approved if you're interested and see fit, we're going to ask for 2 more animal control officers. The total cost on that to the city is about $117,000. What we'd like to do is essentially split our officers into 2 groups and work 7 days a week. Number one, it will reduce our overtime significantly. It will put us actually out on the street and serving the citizens of Victorville 7 days a week, particularly since I believe it's about 60% of our population actually works down the hill. When people are home on the weekends, they'll actually have an animal control officer who can come out who's actually working that day and not out on call doing the after-hours calls. Typically are triaged by their importance. So if it's not imminent threat or imminent danger to life, an officer is going to say, we're sorry, we can't come out right now if it's after hours. Another thing we have a problem with here in Victorville is vehicles. We have 4 vehicles that all have approximately 200,000 or more miles on them. We jokingly say you need to put that in dog years. 200,000 miles in residential service, plus having to keep the vehicles running to keep the animals cool that are sitting in the boxes in the back. There's a lot of hours on that equipment. Any typical day, on average, we have 3 vehicles running out of 4. We can replace 2 of those vehicles for approximately $111,000 with new boxes and brand new trucks. And we hope to do maybe the others in another fiscal year. So that kind of concludes where animal control was at. We're not a huge part of the Safe Cities equation, but it's definitely something that needs attention.
It took us a little while. We were a little bit behind, but finally on your screens we've got some of the stats that Christian talked about.
I have a question.
Yes.
If you have an individual who complains of a continuous barking dog, do you send a code enforcement officer or an animal control officer?
Animal control officer.
Why can't they send code enforcement?
That's typically referred back to animal control.
Maybe we ought to think about that. If the peace and repose and quiet of the neighborhood is being disturbed and it's a legitimate call, we have code enforcement that can issue citations.
Animal
Not
control
picking
also
the dog
can.
up. There's nothing wrong with the dog. It's just a continuous barker. It seems like to me that code enforcement could play a role, something to look at.
Yeah, we certainly can look at that. We have multiple types of code enforcement officers, some of them with that title, some without. Obviously, animal control are a type of code enforcement officer, just very specifically designed. We've also got refuse code enforcement officers as well, who handle more trash calls and illegal dumping type calls. And we have, on occasion, talked about eliminating all the different specific dutied code enforcement officers and maybe having only one that handles all types of complaints. So that's something we can continue to look at.
I was just curious because I know an instance where there was a pool party, the whole neighborhood was aware of it, and there was a dog at the pool party, and the dog continually barked.
Right.
According to the neighbor that filed a complaint, it was an animal control problem.
Mm-hmm.
The individual simply didn't call back, but the fact is that it was a code enforcement problem. Whether it was a loud pool party, loud music, or the dog barking, it's a code enforcement problem. I'd like to look at that.
Yeah, that is one way to increase our enforcement ability. Obviously, if there's an animal running loose, the code enforcement officer typically wouldn't have the ability to capture that animal, store it properly and things. That's more animal control. But if it's merely a complaint about a loud animal that is not subject to seizure, then that's another option for us to consider for those off times.
Just curious. It's just a point to look at.
Christian, a question, and Sam, maybe this would involve you as well, but do any of these type of calls get responded to by deputies that are on beat too?
Yes, they do.
And is there an ability to prevent that in any way? If we know it's an animal control issue, is there an ability? Because see, this is when you talk about the number of calls, and you know, I wish we had a census on number of dogs in this city, but I'm sure it'd be 3 times the amount of people. I'm just wondering, is there a way, an ability to reduce the number of calls going to deputies if we had additional code enforcement officers or animal control officers? I like the mayor's idea of having some sort of cross-training of all code enforcement so that they're addressing all issues. I think we can get a lot more bang for our buck, and I think that idea needs to be studied heavily. But, you know, if you were to tell me that we would have some sort of significant drop in calls that Sam's deputies are responding to that are animal control related by giving you 2 more officers, I'd sign off on it today. So if there's a way of being able to triage the call and figure out, well, we don't need to send, because when it comes to a public safety issue and someone's in an accident, the sheriff rolls and so does the fire department, no matter what. They're required to by law. This doesn't sound like one of those situations where it's required by law. And if we have an ability to control when they go versus when we go, I think we ought to do that.
I absolutely believe that there are synergies to be made by having officers on the street 7 days a week. The sheriff's department, when they have a multi-jurisdictional issue, whether it's somebody with a dog that they're detaining that they've got to do something with the dog with, and an animal control officer has to come into an overtime situation to respond, absolutely. And it works both ways. We also are actually now attending the morning briefings with the sheriff's department as well at BVPD. It's not something that was done in the past. It's only happened, what, Sam, last 6-8 months, approximately?
Yeah, clearly we have animal control calls on the weekends. So we have animal control officers who are on call 24/7 who come in for those calls.
When people are home, so that's when they're going to make the calls.
As those calls, if they're elevated for some reason due to an angry resident because they aren't getting the response from the animal control officers and staff, that's when Sam's guys typically have to roll out just simply to keep the peace, really.
Yeah, our dispatch does a pretty good job at triaging those calls and telling the caller that we're going to refer this to animal control.
Yeah.
Half the time it works, half the time it doesn't. Now, at nighttime and on weekends, if there's a demand for a deputy, we're rolling. Of course, if there's a dangerous or violent animal out, we're going to roll.
Right. But on the weekends or at night when they're not on, you've got no choice. So I'm just
tremendous help if we had more.
Right, and I'm wondering. I mean, I don't know that you could actually get at this number, but how many calls does that result in when you consider that 60% of our population is commuting down the hill to work? They're not here during the day. They're here during the night and on the weekends when we don't have any animal control on. So obviously, when we're going to get the most need for service, we don't have people there.
Just some simple
and for all the people who are watching the council meeting and believe that we don't have animal control night and weekends and they can turn the dogs loose, we really will have them soon. So.
Yeah, we will. Yeah, just in simple math, Sam and I were looking at this morning, actually. If you divide the number of calls for service by the deputies, you're looking at 1,500 to 1,600 calls per deputy. So as we look at, going back to the other item, and this one as well, and the next one, as we look at the number of calls for service, some of those 102,000 calls for service were animal control calls we couldn't handle because we didn't have officers on duty and the person was that insistent. To the extent we can reduce that, if you can reduce 1,600 calls, this is oversimplification, but if you can reduce 1,600 calls, it's as if you've gained a deputy.
I agree.
Do we attempt to categorize and group these calls into certain types? I mean, you can have vicious dogs that attack children, which is one problem. You can have a incessantly barking dog, which frankly, I'll bet those happen as much during the day when the homeowners are gone and the dog's left outside and it's lonely and whatnot. I mean, can we group these into some significant categories?
Actually, every single call that animal control receives is recorded in terms of the actual, what the call was about, who's responded, who was called out, what time the call came in, what time the officer was given the call to respond to. All those things are recorded. My biggest problem right now is bringing us from the analog age to the digital age.
It's what?
What you want to do, I kind of have to do manually at this point,
To
as
gather the
opposed
data
to
and
being
group
able
it.
to
Yeah.
consolidate, have updated software, being able to issue generate notices of noncompliance in the field, gather fees.
You've just
sell
got a
licenses.
massive data is what you've got.
And Doug's supportive of all this, and I know you guys are too. So we're working towards it. We're overcoming a few challenges, so working as fast as we can.
Questions, Councilmember Vice?
I just wanted to say that I agree with Mayor Cox regarding the code enforcement, that we should look at that as well so we could get, double the bang. And then also agree with Councilmember McCachran regarding we need to free up the officers for proactive duty. It's far cheaper, 117 for 2 than 180 for 1. So the numbers make sense there. But I also wanted to say that a lot of complaints that I get regarding animal control is that residents say there's never anyone there to answer the phone. So if you were to get these 2 additional positions, would they answer the phone? Will there be a live person answering the phone?
There's always someone live answering the phone. We have, when we have 2 administrative assistants who work the phones every day. They're there from 7 to 4 or 7 to 5 every day, on Monday through Thursday. I believe one comes in on Friday as well and shifts her time. One is off on Mondays. On the weekends and in the evenings, we have an answering service. That answering service isn't always perfect, but they do a pretty good job. They generally, what they have is a series of questions to ask the caller. They do a triage, basically, and they decide, okay, life threat, non-life threat, and they have a few filters to go through as to whether they will say, okay, it's going to have to wait till Monday. It's a dead dog call, and it's sitting in the road, but it's not a traffic impediment, so we'll be out there on Monday morning first thing to pick it up, versus,
We need to change that. Especially when you see a dead dog in the road and 4 or 5 little kids just sitting there, and it goes on hour after cars don't dodge it. It's not an image that's good for the city.
If we have knowledge that it is a traffic impediment, we'll roll.
What number do you call if you want animal control, nights and weekends?
I believe it's the same number, if I'm not mistaken. They roll the number over. I believe.
I couldn't tell you. Not right this second. I can look it up for you.
Do we call 955-5000, which is the city number, and then it automatically rolls to another number?
I could not tell you, sir.
And I can't tell you off the top of my head,
I
sir.
think we need to look at that.
Yeah, definitely.
I can tell you, sir, that when we do get calls and someone says, I've called a dozen times on this, or I've called 5 times on this, or 3 times on this, sometimes that's true and sometimes it's
I
not.
called the operator, and she didn't know what number to call.
We oftentimes have calls that go into Sam's office that they've called them and they've referred it to animal control and they don't call us back.
I've done that also. But it would just, if we have a city number, it seems to me that we ought to, with today's technology, call the city number and it's going to give you a series of questions.
Mm-hmm.
Is this public? Is this streets? Is it water? Is it sewer? Is it water leak? A sewer leak? Dead animal? And then you dial a certain number. It seemed like to me that would be a tremendous service, and people could get a particular number that would actually reach someone. Something to look at.
The last thing we want, and Christian and I work on this closely just about every other Monday, is that the citizen doesn't get jerked around. Because often it seems like they do. They get referred here, they get no help. They get referred there, no help. Dispatch refers them back, and we need to remember.
We are changing the image of the city, and one of the things that's going to be paramount is citizen support. Get that by showing them that we are responsive and we're listening. So.
One of the items on next week's agenda actually is helping to change that image of the city, and it has to do with new technology that is available. The system you're referring to, Mayor Cox, is called an IVR system, Integrated Voice Response,
Yes.
that we have in limited fashion for some departments. I don't believe we have that for animal control necessarily. But one of the things that we'll be talking about next week is advancing into more of a digital age with applications that are a virtual city hall that can be made available. Getting a little bit off topic for tonight, but one of the things that looks very attractive for our graffiti abatement team and actually their interface with the Sheriff's Department is a resident can, using an application on their smartphone, simply take a picture of a piece of graffiti and go into that app and upload it immediately, and assuming their settings are set on their phone appropriately, the graffiti abatement team would get a GPS signature as to the exact location that photograph was taken. Then they can look at the photograph and see exactly what it is and make a determination, is this a horrible piece of graffiti that we need to get out there immediately, put it to the top of the list to get out and cover it up. That similar thing could be helpful for some of these animal control calls, a dead dog in the roadway. And so we're looking at all those things in an effort to improve the image of the city, just as you're asking.
Mr. Mayor, one thing that I think all of us need to keep in mind is that the only people we hear from in a complaining form are the people who are dissatisfied with contact they've had with the city. We don't get phone calls from the thousands and thousands and thousands of people who contact the city and get exactly what they're trying to get. So I think we need to keep that in mind. The only people that call me are people that are complaining. Nobody calls me and says, geez, the police did a great job patrolling this neighborhood today. We don't get that.
That is a plea to call
remember.
Mr. Kennedy and thank him.
And Mayor Cox, just to wrap up the discussion, not to cut anybody off, just to wrap up the discussion, when you asked me the question about what number do you call after hours, I don't know that number off the top of my head. I didn't actually know that it was the same or not, but happened to have a staff member who was able to look on his computer, sent me a text that says it's the same number. So it's the same, very same number, 955-5089. After hours and during hours, obviously during hours you'll get to the dispatch for animal control. After hours, it's forwarded to the answering service.
Well, several years ago, the city put out a list of numbers which are on my refrigerator, and they're very helpful, except not when I'm in the automobile.
Well, hopefully soon,
Mayor
Cox, you'll have that list of numbers in your smartphone in an application that you can upload all these pictures of the dead dogs.
And when were you going to buy that smartphone, Mr. Mayor?
Carry my computer, too, and use it while I'm driving. Any other questions from
I just wanted to, on a wrap-up of the animal control, I would be highly supportive of bringing on your weekend staff. I, a while back, had a situation where there was a pretty bad animal emergency and tried to make a call. It was a disaster. Nothing happened. The weekends just don't work. So I'd be very much in support of that. And on the good news, to follow up on your comments, Jim, I went on a ride-along with animal control not long ago, a while back, just to see what they do, because after that experience, I was upset. So I wanted to see how it worked. And I was pleasantly surprised with one of your officers named Rose. Is she still with us?
Yes, she is.
She was amazing, you guys. And I got to know her, and my eyes were opened on what these people do out there for the benefit of these animals, even though they get a bad rap as dog catchers or whatever people call them. And Rose was in the process of going to college to get her legal degree so she could become an attorney and fight for animals' rights. That's how much she was into this job. So
This is another instance where you have employees that do a great job, and they do a great job. The public simply doesn't know about it, and they don't see it, because we do. We hear about the negative or the bad experience. Christian, thank you.
Thank you.
We have no other questions on this, because we're going to go to residential code enforcement. And Doug, why residential code enforcement as opposed to just code enforcement?
We already have clear direction from the council on things such as signage, temporary signs and things. So this is a discussion about another aspect of that. We do inspections. We do take a look at commercial businesses and industrial areas for code enforcement. But the previous council stopped short of implementing a more proactive or more aggressive residential code enforcement option. So similarly to the Sheriff's Department and the Animal Control discussion about costs and benefits, we wanted to give you some information for you to consider at a later time when it comes time for budget as to, is this something else you are interested in pursuing? And this is another issue that will be raised again next week as we talk about this specifically relating to housing. So George Duran is our code enforcement manager, and he's here to talk about future needs for code enforcement.
Thank you, Doug. Good evening, council members, Commissioner, Mr. Cox. Yes, I wanted to provide an overview of basically of what we do, where we're at with code enforcement, the amount of cases that we have, and talk about where we're going and where we need to go. Currently, there's 6 officers and a manager operating code enforcement. One of the officers we do have an officer sitting in taking calls and creating cases. That serves as a more efficient way to streamline the calls and get the officers to prioritize our cases as they're called in. The officers work 6 days per week. They rotate on weekends every 6 weeks, and a 2-man crew rotates every 9 weeks. Currently, the officers at an average of $87,000. That includes fringe and pay rate. They are funded partially by CDBG grants, state tire grants, but however, those grants are limited to area and task. In other words, CDBG has an area that is approved for code enforcement to go out, and of course, a lot of the majority of the population in the city is in the western portion of the city, which is not covered by a grant. Typical code enforcement tasks currently include land use enforcement, which is zoning and enforcement of conditional use permits, and abatement of illicit businesses such as maybe marijuana shops, housing and property maintenance enforcement, public nuisance abatement and board ups. Our code enforcement officers have actively and currently still actually doing abatements of board ups, such as board up of vacant houses, draining green pools. On occasion, we will also use work release workers and do weed abatements in developed lots. Code enforcement also addresses permit and construction enforcement for areas that are, for those that are doing things without permits. We coordinate the demolition program through CDBG funds. We execute approximately 2 programs per year. We receive funds from our CDBG allotment and perform roughly about 5 to 10 demolitions per year. We also do mobile home park inspections as mandated by the state. We do illegal sign enforcement, illegal sign enforcement, such as the signs that are posted on street poles. With that, typically in residential violations specifically, we're addressing junk debris, decayed and unmaintained landscapes and weeds, substandard living conditions, typically reported by tenant and landlords. And these are conditions such as broken windows, vermin, maybe lack of utilities, sewage and water and mold issues. We address storage of inoperative vehicles. We address stagnant pools, maybe parking on the front lawn as well, or commercial vehicle parking on residential zones. We address unsecured and vacant structures. We address illegal businesses in residential areas, maybe auto repair businesses, a common violation, or maybe contractors who are using the residential zone for storage of materials. We also address other home occupation limitations and requirements that regulate a business operating in a residential zone. Other most common violations are also basketball courts and other recreational items that are typically left unattended in the street, along with the enforcement of rental business license that's currently in place as a requirement. Currently, our code enforcement division handles about 2,500 calls, cases a year. Currently, though, there are 2,400, a little bit over 2,400 cases active and open. These are cases from prior years, cases in various stages of enforcement, whether they're being invoiced, whether they're being pursued through abatement, whether they're being pursued through citations. To date, we have 1,108 cases as of the 19th of this month, compared to last year at 591 cases. The increase is attributed primarily to the recent enforcement of our temporary sign enforcement. Our recent efforts have been our proactive sign enforcement, which our officers are 4 officers actually at the time, because we just hired 2, conducted 2,064 business contacts, and of that, 583 notice of violations were issued for locations that were found to be in violation. The 2,064 contacts actually resulted in an actual inspection form issued to the business to allow them to correct the violations, and we're given a significant amount of time to make those corrections. And of course, out of those, 583 locations were eventually issued notice of violations. To date, we currently have about 107 locations that are still outstanding and still need to reach compliance. Our recent changes that we've made in the department, we've recently adopted, revised and adopted our code enforcement ordinance in our development code, and also adopted our 2012 International Property Maintenance Code. That has allowed us to streamline our process to address certain issues that, certain violations that the municipal code just did not address, maybe such as architectural features in a house that seem to add to the blight. Maybe we're talking about the lighting that's the motion lighting that's available sometimes in some parking areas. Maybe we have a house that's, you know, it's not maintaining that. The municipal code didn't really specifically address that, and the adoption and the revision of the recent code has basically straightened that. We've also increased our civil penalties in connection with what state law allows. We've increased our, we've matched the state's allowable civil fine to $1,000 per day for violation. That was needed because we were encountering properties that were not maintained, sometimes owned by banks, and the citations, the amounts weren't being weren't significant enough to get their attention. Other jurisdictions have done that, and we've seen that other jurisdictions were very successful in that. We've also discussed with our sanitation code enforcement crew. They've recently acquired a vehicle that does proactively goes out and abates illegal dumping, versus going through the motions of notifying a property owner and waiting for compliance. We've been in discussions to try to streamline that program to group our efforts to maybe forward those types of calls to sanitation to get abatements done a lot quicker after a particular notice, similar to weed abatement, and pursue the cost of abatement, but achieve a much quicker physical response and result into getting the actual trash truck out there and picking this stuff up. So we've made some adjustments to definitely streamline and achieve more significant recognizable results in our enforcement. Again, I wanted to provide you a brief snapshot, I guess, of our operations, where we're at, the amount of staff that we have, the amount of cases that we're managing, and also, again, provide you with the cost of a code enforcement officer in hopes of obviously acquiring more officers and allowing us to proactively address some of these problem properties. I can tell you that a majority of these cases are in fact reactive. I would guess that close to 90% of them are.
Mr. Duran, thank you.
Sure.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
The individuals who have rental units are required to have a business license. You do an inspection, I believe, once a year. Is there a charge for the inspection, or is that included in the business license?
You're asking if we do an inspection for a rental? We don't. Currently, we do not.
Who does?
There isn't a requirement in the code to do
I
that.
suggest the council keep that in mind, a mandatory annual inspection of all rental units. It's not uncommon for cities to require an annual inspection for rental units. It's not uncommon at all. Secondly, if we have banks that are holding houses for reasons that I don't understand, and they've shut the water off and it's going dead and the bushes are dying, what does code enforcement do with those? Is it considered a fire hazard or a nuisance or what?
Definitely both. A nuisance. There's no water. There's no landscape. If we're talking about whether it's sod or rock, weeds come out through the rock, which is, in my opinion, sometimes a little bit more difficult to abate. It's definitely we treat it as a nuisance. We gauge it by severity. Code enforcement through the use again of community service workers or work release workers will go out with actual equipment and do the abatement. Again, it's based on severity, and we're also very limited to the amount of time that we can dedicate to that. It's very time consuming.
I believe that banks may have the absolute right to just close a house up and leave it vacant for a year or two. But I don't think they have the right to create a nuisance in the neighborhood. And so I want council to take a look at. In that case, we would take a code enforcement action and then lien the property.
Absolutely. Fines would be assessed. Before fines are assessed, the notice of pendency is recorded. It's important to record the notice of pendency, not necessarily to recover the cost that the city has spent on enforcement, but primarily to alert those who are purchasing the house that there is a problem here and that it needs to be rectified. Typically, it's the potential buyer.
But presently, code enforcement, residential code enforcement, is on a complaint basis. It isn't a part of your program yet, is it?
No, sir.
Yeah, that was the purpose for putting this on the agenda. It's something that isn't necessarily crime, but it relates to feeling safer in your city if you can clean up some of these issues using code enforcement. So Safer City, as we discussed back in January, isn't 100% crime. There's other aspects that can help you feel safer. And looking at the cost of both the animal control officer as well as code enforcement officer, obviously a uniformed police officer is necessarily going to be more cost to the city. And there are times that as you try to balance those things, maybe you put some money towards these other types of officers that can help you feel safe that aren't necessarily out there riding or chasing purely criminal activity.
I forgot. You have 2 or 4 code enforcement officers?
Currently, we have 6.
6?
6 code enforcement officers. One of them, like I said, is actually the person we assign, and we rotate that to do a call taken in case creation.
Okay. Okay, questions? Councilman Keckman.
George, the idea came up earlier about cross-training and getting the most bang for our buck, and if I remember correctly, we have 4 animal control officers, 2 in sanitation, you have 6, animal control is looking for 2 more. I mean, that would give us a total of 14 officers. Obviously, they do different things, but even within your own department, you have 1 officer, they rotate, that takes those incoming calls to figure out who goes and does what. So obviously it works already within your own 4 walls, I would imagine.
Right.
Okay. And I say that because that gives us perspective. We've, in essence, have 14 officers that, yeah, they have different jobs, but we could utilize and adding to that, even get more bang for our buck. Doug, in correct me if I'm wrong, it sounded like you said something along the lines of this council stopped short of wanting proactive residential code enforcement when we asked for the proactive code enforcement. I don't remember us stopping short, but if we did, I'm here to tell you I want to see proactive residential code enforcement. I thought that was the whole point of us bringing on 2 additional officers. I know the initial focus was on the signs, but at some point that's dealt with. So these additional 2 code enforcement officers should have some duty as to respect what's the next step, and I thought that was residential.
And that is exactly why this is on the agenda. When my comment, I apologize if I misstated something. What I was thinking in my head at least, was that when the past city council adopted the business license for rental housing units, as an example, essentially, if you have a rental house, single rental house, you're required to get a business license. It costs you $25. They make sure that you go out and do that. If you are not maintaining your rental house, or if you're somehow in violation of that business license, the penalty is we take your business license away. And that's it. So that's what I meant by stopping short. The past city council, there was discussion about a rental housing ordinance. There was a discussion about a rental housing inspection program, I want to say maybe 2 years ago, and it was ultimately defeated as an option. That's something that we want to provide more information at next week's meeting. So I don't want to get too deep into that, but it is a discussion point. So the stopping short I'm referring to is not the current sitting city council. It was the council that started down that path. They only went a short ways down the path.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, I don't know what the point of having a residential rental business license is if you're not going to have some teeth to it. So it's either one or the other. I would think that this council ought to at least explore that. Obviously, you can't have an inspection program unless it's funded. So we got to figure out a way to fund that either through an annual inspection fee. But I know I'm going to get calls from my friends in the property management industry going, what the heck are you doing? So if nothing else, I think we should involve them. It's not new here in Victorville. We're not, creating the wheel here. This is being done all over the place. So for Victorville to be considering it cannot be outside the box.
No, it's not. It has been implemented in other cities. I know in Hesperia they had it for a while, and it was ultimately overturned or expired. I'm not sure exactly what happened there. And also part of the reason why this was on the agenda was exactly as you stated, Mayor Pro Tem, was that not that the temporary sign ordinance is that we're done with that. Certainly we still have open cases, but it is beginning to wrap up. We've had actually a tremendous compliance and a tremendous positive compliance, I'll say. And we believe that the city looks better as a result. So the discussion that we're hoping for on this item is what are some of the council members and planning commissioners' thoughts on where do we go next? Where do we go from here? What's high on your own priority list as we have some of those officers freed up to take a look at some of these other things? What do you want?
Well, let's hear from the council members, and we'll start on the left, and then Council Member Vyas, and come right on down the table.
Okay.
Or, no, I'm sorry, on the left is Mr. Kennedy.
He's on the other side of the wall there.
I'm sorry.
We let him sit on the good side of the wall.
I apologize.
Well, I argued against the inspection fee for all rental owners 2 years ago, and I'll argue against it when it comes up again. I don't think government at any level ought to come up with sweeping solutions to perceived problems. I think the first thing we must do is identify the real nature of the problem, isolate those, define what they are, and go after the problems. Let's take the ordinances that we have in place and put teeth in them and enforce them where they're being violated, as opposed to just making broad, sweeping decisions to do things. I think we have those mechanisms in place. You made a statement that I'm not sure I heard. I couldn't possibly have heard it correctly, but I think you said it was somehow a violation of an ordinance or an enforcement issue to park a vehicle on a lawn?
Yes, currently there's an ordinance that prohibits that.
That's amazing to me. I see them all over town. It's just incredible.
And we get complaints all the time.
What happens if the lawn is decorative rock?
That's an
Define
argument that's posed
decorative.
very often.
That's part of the problem, is how do you define decorative?
And what happens if the neighbor paves over their entire front lawn and their front of their house is a sea of
They're
cars?
limited to do that too. There's some standards with that.
I would just like us to address the ordinances we have and
Yeah.
but go after the real problems, not just broad general solutions.
Councilmember Vice?
I'd like to see more proactive patrol with code enforcement to not just be reactive, but to go out there and find the problems. I think with this application, these apps that we're going to put out there, I think that'll help us a lot. As far as, I think that there's a big problem with absentee landlords, and we need to figure out how to get control of that and hold them accountable, because I think that they are a problem in this city. And you know, I'm not sure about the inspection fees and that sort of thing, but I do know that we need to figure out a way to fund this program, and we can't continue to grow big government and just continue to pay for more code enforcement officers. So if there's a way that we could fund it through inspection fees, or if there's another way that we can do it, but we need to do it. So I'm all for proactive code enforcement.
Councilmember Garcia?
Well, I'm also in agreement for proactive and following, you know, what we do have, or take all the ordinance that we do have in place and enforce that. There are so many areas that do need, I think, priority over others. You actually explained so many of them to us. And I do believe that if we actually look into the matter a little closer, we can come up with the issues that are more important, and we can actually use our enforcement for that reason. Okay? Thank you.
Councilmember Catherine?
Just a question on funding this type of stuff, and Doug, this might be a question for you or Keith. The Neighborhood Stabilization Program monies that we get through the federal government, can any of those be used in this type of kind of program where we go out and, I mean, we're trying to stabilize a neighborhood. We have problem homes, whether they be owned by banks or absentee landlords or people that just don't care. I would think that that would fit the definition of stabilizing a neighborhood.
Yeah, NSP is something that is coming back to the council as another workshop. But that is an option, and one that we will be likely recommending for all those reasons. We do also use some of the other CDBG grant funds in those targeted neighborhoods that we're allowed to do code enforcement and to do take care of some of these abatements and things as well. We already are doing.
And the reason I bring that up is because it's specific to, you know, the time and that we're in, and the ability to fund some of these proactive enforcement options without charging fees for inspections. Councilmember Kennedy brought that up. I don't know that I would vote for that either, but if we're going to go out there and do it, we got to figure out a way to fund it. And that was, you know, either it's got to be a fee or we've got to have some other grant type of funding to pay for it.
And Chairman Porter? Chairperson Porter.
That's all right.
I just had a couple of questions. You said that you needed additional residential code enforcement. How many, I don't know if I just didn't hear you, how many additional officers did you say that you would need, or that you would like?
I think it depends as to what the priorities our council provides. I mean, a rental inspection program definitely is going to require some work. I assume that this will be discussed next week, but I have some preliminary numbers of the amount of rentals that we have, and that number alone is not manageable with the current stat that we have now. 2 to 4, I would say, at least 2, to address the program should the council desire to pursue a rental inspection program to at least guarantee the quality of the rental license, to give it some meaning as to what that means. And 2 more to increase general proactive enforcement with other nuisances that I listed earlier.
That's it for me. Thanks.
I say we let Mr. Duran off of his leash. We go proactive. I think looking around and seeing for a number of years all these, a number of blighted houses in these neighborhoods. I don't know if a business license and a program and trying to set up funding for that is all needed, I say just go, target the homes that are blighted. I don't care if they're rented. I don't care if they're owner occupied. We'll find a way to get to them. I mean, they have utilities, and we can contact them somehow.
I really like the idea of the app, that you would just take a picture and you would send it to a number, and where they would have the address. Well, you could add the address, that wouldn't be a big thing. I know that going through our neighborhood that I could take a number of pictures and they'd be really happy. I could keep you busy for a couple of weeks, but for every time that somebody parks their car in the and starts working on it mechanically and puts and puts trash in their yard and stuff like that. That's the reason why we have rules and regulations and ordinances. And I like the proactive approach. I really do. If we want to beautify our city, we have to do that because of the trash problem and stuff. So, but I'm happy for this opportunity for us to hash out all the what we might be able to do about the problems.
Thank you. I think you've heard from the council that they want the staff, enforcement, animal control, sheriff's department to be proactive. We are sincerely in cleaning up the city. My son, in an attempt to sell a house, couldn't figure out why the neighbor parked 3 cars in the yard, 5 foot from where he's trying to sell a house. Didn't put it in the street because there were no parking on the street the way they were designed. Didn't put it in the driveway. And we assumed the garage was full. One day the garage was open. There was no cars in the garage, but they were all parked on the front lawn. I didn't know if it was a religious reason or what. I finally decided to ask the individual, and he said, because the kids like to play basketball, and they have this portable basketball in the garage that they bring out. And I said, why don't you do it in the backyard? And then he showed me the backyard, and he doesn't have one. So that'll come up again when we talk to these people.
That'll come up next week. I guarantee it.
Because there's a lot of odd reasons why people do things. And I can give you a lot of photographs where there's no vehicle in front of the house, there's no vehicle in the driveway, and there's 3 to 5 vehicles in the lawn. That is just amazing. So we have a lot to talk about. We're going to be, I'm getting a lot of input, by the way, from general public, person on the street, and even some business people that are applauding the city for the code enforcement. They admit that it's looking better, and their concern was that somebody was going to pick on them and let their neighbor or their competitor do something. Now that they have seen that it's being equally enforced, some of the people who talked to me that were really opposed to this code enforcement are now very much for code enforcement and saying, don't stop, and we don't intend to. So, George, thank you very much. Thank you, staff, for this. We got a lot of work to do, a lot of budgetary considerations to make. And while we're talking about code enforcement and to some degree neighborhood, residential code enforcement, we have a meeting next Tuesday. That's a special meeting also.
6 o'clock, yes.
Because of the 5th, well, it's not a regular council meeting, is it?
No, it's not.
And so, is this going to be a joint meeting of the Planning Commission and Council too?
Yes, it is, and this is specifically focused on housing. There's going to be discussion of not the code amendments that came before the council, although that certainly spurred the discussion. It's that code amendment isn't being considered for adoption or not at that meeting. It's simply a discussion about all the issues that were raised by staff as a result of that, and then the corresponding discussions from the Building Industry Association.
George, we're all through. George, thank you. We're done. Thank you.
We're including in that because we want to maximize your time. A couple of other aspects of a prettier and cleaner community, such as that application, those applications, things like that. Things that seem to make sense regarding housing, we group together for the meeting next week.
We have a request. I have a letter from Mr. Rodriguez requesting that they have time. We're going to give them time, but that Dr. Husey make his finding May 6th. May 6th is a regular council meeting, isn't it?
It is a regular, well, it is a regular council meeting, but the council meeting has been canceled due to a lack of quorum. There's going to be, I know, 2 council members, as well as myself and the assistant city manager in Washington, D.C., lobbying for funding for largely the Yucca-Loma Green Tree and the railroad bridge, and extension of that or completion of that corridor. So that May 6th meeting is going to be canceled. I personally talked with Dr. Husing about it last week, and he had a conflict on the 29th, next Tuesday. He has since cleared that conflict, and he will be here on the 29th
He will be here on the
to
29th.
discuss. Yeah.
That is good, because I would hope that we have all the issues relating to this wrapped up within no more than 30 days from tonight. Up to all the things we need to do, we can give them all the ample time, make the decisions we need to make, and then get on with life in Victorville.
Just to let the council and commission know, the notebook that you provided in your mailbox earlier today, I shared some of that data with Dr. Husing because I'd like his opinion on the long-term cost of residential housing. Mayor Cox, Mayor Pro Tem McEachran, and I were able to attend a relatively small gathering that he was speaking at, so I asked him for his opinion on the long-term cost or benefit of single-family residential homes. So I've shared some of the data with him, and I'm curious to see if he's able to digest and respond to it next week.
Very quickly, because I'm going to go to the public comment. I'm not through, and then we'll come back and we'll talk amongst the council members. So go ahead.
Oh, the only thing I was going to say about next Tuesday, with the fact that John Husing's going to be here, the building industry wants to make a presentation. We expect a presentation from staff. I'm just wondering if everyone here would be open to starting at 5 instead of 6, so we have an adequate amount of time to allow for those presentations and still be able to deliberate as a council. I'd be here at 5 if that works for everyone else.
You tell me the time I can be here. I know other members of council do have conflicts, but
5 o'clock works
5
for me.
o'clock for me works.
5 or 5:30?
5.
5? Pardon?
5.
Okay, 5 o'clock.
8 times 9.
Okay, let me go back to. Sorry about this. Got notes all over this thing. I didn't. Public comment. Now's the time if anyone wants to address the council on any item. There's generally cards. I don't have any, but if you have a need to address the council, you can do so at this time. I make the comments that I do every time because this letter says we've only been allowed 3 minutes. If you're on the agenda, you're allowed all the time you need. If you're addressing the council on an item that's not on the agenda, thus we cannot discuss it. There is a Brown Act. We can't engage in debate. We can't offer an opinion. We technically can't even answer. And so we do restrict it to 3 minutes. And but we do listen, and if it's necessary to agendize at a later time, we will do so. You are standing before us, sir. If you'll give your name, and then you may address the council.
Thank you, Mayor Cox. I will take less than 1 minute. I just wanted to introduce myself and offer myself as part of these ongoing discussions. My name is Dan Ackerman. I'm the Executive Director of the County of San Bernardino Housing Authority. And as you know, we operate in just about every city in the county, and we have jurisdiction of this city. So I consider myself working for you as planning commissioners and as council members, and we'll be at the table for discussions in how to make this a better place to live.
Appreciate that very much. Please leave your business card. I'd like to meet with you sometime. Anyone else want to address the city council? I don't know. We have another individual coming up.
My name is Omar Perez, and I'm a 10-year resident of Victorville. No, Mr. Robertson. I'd just like to say I'm really interested in the code enforcement. I moved to Eagle Ranch 10 years ago. I used to love it. Lately, you know, with all the blight and the rentals, it's become quite a downgrade for the quality of life. So I lived in Pomona. We're better than Pomona. They used to enforce lawns. As soon as you had your house started looking terrible, they come out and force you to do something, or encourage you to do something. I was going to change my grass once in Pomona, and I let it die, and within 2 weeks, they're out there saying, you got to do something. You got to show us a plan. What are you going to do? I just like to improve the view of Eagle Ranch. I've seen it go down with the rentals. And part of it is landlords don't care. I know one house where the tenant asked the landlord, I'll do the work, I'll do the landscaping, and the landlord told him no. Part of it is, in my block, there's 3 rentals now. One rental's great because the tenant doesn't like to live without grass, or he takes care of it, he pays for the water. The other 2 rentals is dirt and weeds, and kind of makes the whole block look terrible.
Thank you. Hopefully soon you can provide those addresses to our code enforcement, and the neighborhood will be improved. Thank you for your comments.
I would appreciate that.
Anyone else want to address the council? Seeing no one, and there's no cards in front of me, I'm going to close that portion. Now comments from individual planning commissioners, individual council. We've started with the council each night. Madam Chair, we'll start with your side.
Sure. I'd just like to thank everybody who made the presentations tonight. The information is important to be able to make decisions both at the commission and council level. And I think with the information we got tonight that there's definite directions that we can discuss going in. So thank you.
I agree.
Well, I agree too. It's a start for a better quality of life and beautification of our city.
Thank you. Council members, Mr. Kennedy. Councilmember Bias?
Well, I was very pleased with the presentations. I really did learn quite a bit, and I think it's important for council to be learning because we don't have all the answers.
Thank you. Councilman Kekron. Doug, I have a letter here that's from the building industry. They indicate that this is a letter from the building industry regarding agenda item number 4, residential code enforcement. I'm going to, and I have it, I didn't receive it until tonight, I will read it. I do appreciate all the input we give, and so staff will note that, include it with their comments at our next meeting.
Will do.
We have no further business coming to us. We're going to adjourn this meeting. We'll not adjourn it to the next Tuesday, or do we? Call special meeting, so then we'll have that as concludes our business. Thank you for attending. Everyone have a good evening.
An adjournment of the Planning Commission.
We have a program for we
Park my cars in the garage because I want people home. So I keep my car outside.
Well, you can, but